Hey guys, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I am Greg. Now, about 5 months ago, I did a review of Sam Wasson's book, Fosse, about the life of Bob Fosse, which of course has been adapted into the TV show Fosse Verdon, which just finished airing on FX. And Stephen Pavlock left a comment asking me what I thought of the adaptation. So I thought I would talk about that a little bit today. I'm not going to do a full comparison between the TV show and the book because there are 8 episodes of the TV show and that starts to get to be a lot. So just kind of a broad strokes look. Specifically why Stephen was asking is because the way the book is structured, every chapter is named for how much time Bob Fosse has left to live. He was very concerned with death and artistry, and he wanted to make sure he got a lot in. So because he's so fixated on his own death, the book takes that structure, and the TV show does actually pick up on that. The thing with the book is it just ends when he dies. That's it. There's no wrap up, there's no coda. And that was particularly frustrating for me because Bob Fosse is a very problematic figure. At the time, he was just really regarded as a genius, but we now, looking back now, especially in the focus of my review was that we're looking at him in the Time's Up era, and so many things that he did are now acknowledged to be predatory. Like he kind of sexually assaults people, and it's gross, and we know that it's gross now. We acknowledge that it's gross now. Basically, if he was alive now, he'd be Harvey Weinstein, and it puts his art in a very weird place. So because there's no wrap-up in the book, I didn't feel like I was fully able to process any of that. And I really needed a little bit of help figuring out, like, how am I supposed to feel about this? Am I supposed to respect his artistry? Am I supposed to is Bob Fosse canceled? What am I supposed to do with it? All of these feelings that I have after reading this book. And the TV show... there will be spoilers for the TV show, by the way. I should add that right now. So the TV show, in the last episode, it does end with Bob Fosse's death, as the book did. However, it has a coda. You know, one of those where there's an image and then it plays title cards over it that tell you things that happened afterward. And that, I think, does give it a little bit. But what the TV series does, that the book does not, is it really includes the perspective of Gwen Verdon. I mean, it's right there in the name of the TV show is Fosse Verdon. And interestingly, that is because of Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon's daughter, Nicole Fosse. She obviously had the rights to her parents' story, so when she was approached, she said, basically, that she didn't like how people always focused on her father and ignored her mother. So when they adapted the TV show, they very much included the perspective of Gwen Verdon, and I think that adds a lot. The book kind of hints at the interplay between Fosse and Verdon, but the show more literally gets at it, and it makes it a lot more interesting in a way. And having Gwen Verdon's perspective really adds a lot because you have the perspective of the woman who is really... she is heavily involved in everything that Bob Fosse does, and again, the book implies that, but doesn't really explicitly deal with it. So it's really interesting to see just how much she influenced Bob Fosse and how much he relied on her and how much her career suffered because she was a woman, because she was aging, as people do, and because she essentially put her own career on hold to raise a kid and help Bob Fosse. And that is such an interesting side of the story. However, the TV show does deal with Bob Fosse's bad behavior. I don't think you can say at all that it does not include it, but it does not go into detail. It kind of glosses over a lot of things that were really problematic. There's one instance in the TV show where he takes a girl from the chorus and follows her, walks her home, and implies that she's only going to get a featured part if she sleeps with him. But it's kind of implied through omission that that's the only time something like that happened on the TV show. And it's not. That was a repeated pattern of behavior. He would tell girls in auditions that all of his leading ladies sleep with him. The implication, of course, being, if you don't sleep with me, you can't be one of my leading ladies. And the fact that it's done in the audition process makes that very explicit that that is what he's saying. So it was a repeated pattern of behavior that in the TV show gets lumped into this one incident that they don't say that's the only time it ever happened, but because you only see it that one time and it's not commented on, it's kind of implied that that was like a one-time casting couch thing, and I didn't like that. I thought that was a little problematic. They do show his perfectionism, but they don't really go in depth. In fact, they kind of gloss over the example of his work that would most explicitly deal with that, which was the show Dancin' on Broadway. He drove his dancers so hard that many of them were in danger of injury or exhaustion, and they kind of gloss over that. And what comes across in the show is that he's kind of bluntly honest in a way that's not really tactful or considered polite, but he's always thinking about the best interest of the show. And what in reality happened is he was kind of a jerk, and he would drive his dancers really hard. He could be mean to everybody. He rapidly pursued the idea of perfection, even though perfection is basically unattainable. And the TV series kind of makes it look like it's less of what it was. I think you have to take both the book and the TV series to get a well-rounded picture of things, because what the TV series proves is that you can't look at Bob Fosse without talking about Gwen Verdon, and the book does try to do that. I mean, it talks about Gwen Verdon, but it's much more interesting to have her integrated into the story and talk about her perspective on things, because the way she looks at Bob does get at some of those things, and it gives me the context I need to process how I feel about the bad behavior of Bob Fosse. The problem is the TV series downplays a lot of that bad behavior, or glosses over it, or just it doesn't really deal with it as explicitly, because I guess it's worried that he'll be unlikable if they talk about it too much. The TV series also limits the time frame of things. The book covers his childhood all the way to his death and then just stops at his death. The TV series picks up with the film version of Sweet Charity. He had choreographed Sweet Charity on Broadway, but it became his first gig as a director of a movie. It was not very well received, and if you watch it, it's not a great movie. It has its flaws. You can see a lot of genius developing, but it's kind of like he had a lot of ideas and he tried to do all of them at once. So we go from Sweet Charity to Sweet Charity, because as he died, he was working on a revival of Sweet Charity for Broadway, starring Debbie Allen. So they use Sweet Charity as a sort of bookend, and then they only really cover his major projects in between. Those major projects, of course, being the film version of Cabaret, Pippin on Broadway, Chicago. They talk about the movie Lenny, and they talk about All That Jazz, which was a very autobiographical movie that he did. And they use those shows to talk about him. They've kind of flashed back to a little bit of Damn Yankees and Pal Joey. Kind of, it gets mentioned, but it's not really dealt with. So it kind of glosses over a lot. You get flashbacks to his childhood and some of the things that made him who he is, but it doesn't deal with his backstory as explicitly as the book does. So in a way, I feel like you really need both. The TV show helps you get to the idea of closure, but the book gives you a lot more detail about what you would need closure about. And I hope that makes sense. So those are my thoughts about the TV show Fosse Verdon, and it as an adaptation of the book Fosse by Sam Wasson. I definitely think the show is worth watching for the performances alone. Sam Rockwell really does an incredible job getting the voice of Bob Fosse down. I was showing my husband clips of Bob Fosse speaking just so he could have the same level of appreciation of just how much he captured the way Bob Fosse talks, or talked. And of course, Michelle Williams is amazing. She deserves all the awards in the world. She really makes Gwen Verdon come to life. It's amazing. If this was a movie, I'd say she should win an Oscar, but I definitely think she should win an Emmy, a Golden Globe, anything she is eligible for. A lot of great Broadway actors show up in parts along the way. Norbert Leo Butz, who's a Tony Award-winning actor, plays Paddy Chayefsky, who was Bob Fosse's best friend, and he ended up being one of my favorite parts of the show. He is wonderful every time he shows up. It's just the performances on the show are fantastic and worth the price of admission alone. Now again, I know that's a quick overview, doesn't really delve into the nitty-gritty of anything, but there being 8 episodes to deal with, it just seems like an overview is the best we can do. So, if you've watched Fosse Verdon, I would love to hear what you think about it, especially if you've read the book Fosse by Sam Wasson as well, and whether or not it gave you a sense of closure, if you think it kind of glossed over a lot of his bad behavior, how you think it did portraying him. And as always, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate your time. If you're already subscribed, you're the best. If you are not, I hope you enjoyed this enough to hit subscribe, and I will be back. Until then, happy reading.